demo, I will go over the installation and configuration of Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, also known as MDT. At the end, I will demonstrate the installation of Windows 11 Enterprise on a client using MDT process. Please keep in mind, this is a comprehensive guide on creating MDT shares within your Windows Server 2022. This is a multi-step process and there are chapters listed in the description of this video so you can jump to specific sections. Before we install MDT, we need to install the components that require to run MDT. These components include Windows Assessment and Deployment Kit, also known as Windows ADK, Windows Preinstallation Environment, also known as Windows PE, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, which is the MDT, and the Microsoft Deployment Services, also known as WDS server role. Let's download and install Windows ADK and PE. To do that, I will open our web browser. For me, it will be our Microsoft Edge. You can use any web browser you like, and we will search for Windows ADK. The first link here is the download and install the Windows ADK is from Microsoft, and that's the one we will use. I will leave these links in the description of this video so it is easy for you to find. On this page, if we go down halfway on the page, you will see the option called the Download ADK for Windows 11. The current available latest version is the version 22H2, so that's the version I'll be downloading. If you are interested in the previous versions of this ADK, you can find that under Other ADK Download section of the same page. For example, you can download the ADK for Windows 11 version and the PE Preinstallation Environment as well. So we are not interested in Windows 10, we are interested in the Windows 11 ADK and its Preinstallation Environment add-ons. So what we're going to do, we will click on this link to download the Windows ADK for Windows 11 version 22H2, and we will click the other link right below it, the Windows PE add-on, which is the Pre-Installation Environment add-on, to download that option as well. So once these files has been downloaded, next thing we will do is we'll go into the download folder and we need to run these setup files. Notice that these two application files have about 2 megabytes or about 1800 or 2100 kilobytes in size. That means these files don't actually contain all the information we need. These are basically setup files that we will use to download the necessary files and install it on this server. The first one we need to run is the ADK setup. So I'm going to right click and choose Run as Administrator. And in here we have two options: install Windows Assessment and Deployment Kit to this computer, which will go ahead and download the components and start installing, or we can choose download the Windows Assessment and Deployment Kit for installation on a separate computer. This will download the files but would not install until you go into that location and start installing. You can use this option in situations where you need to install it on a different location, or you have to install these packages offline. So you can download it through this feature or this option first and then install it later. For this demonstration, I will choose the option called Install the Windows Assessment and Deployment Kit to this computer. That will go ahead and download the component directly onto this server. Then I'm going to click Next. It will ask for Windows privacy information, whether they should share some usage information with Microsoft. I'm going to say no here. I'm going to click Next. This is the user agreement. You can read that through, and if you agree, we can click Accept. And in here we have a couple of features that are required to run MDT. The most important features are the deployment tools, and the user state migration tool. However, by default, there are a few other tools available to us that are already checked off, such as the deployment tools, the imaging and configuration designer, which allow us to create our own images, configuration designer, which I will go over later, that allow us to create configurations within our MDT, the Windows Performance Toolkit, the Microsoft User Experience virtualization options. For now, I will keep all the default options because I have enough space to download all of them and install it, which is 1.5 gigabytes. And I'm going to click install. Depending on your server configuration and the internet speeds, this might take a while. Once the installation process has been completed, we can go ahead and install the other components. So we have completed the installation of assessments and deployment kit. We can close this window. Next item we will install is the Win PE setup. In other words, the pre-installation environment. That's this file which we just downloaded a few minutes ago. I'm going to right click and select Run as Administrator. And it will open up the Windows Assessment and Deployment Kit Windows Pre-installation Environment add-on. And again, this one also has the same option, either download it to a separate location or download and install onto this server. I'm gonna leave it as install it on this server and click next. For Windows privacy, I'm gonna say no. Click next. Here's a user agreement again, and you can read it through, and if you agree, click accept. And it'll give us the option to install Windows Pre-installation Environment, also known as Windows PE. It is about 3.6 gigabyte, and it will gonna get installed on my C drive, and we have enough room here, so we're gonna click install. Again, depending on your internet speeds and your server configuration, this might take a while. Once that installation has been completed, we can close this window. And next thing we need to do is to install the MDT. Again, we will go back to our internet. Basically, I'm going to the Bing search, and I'm gonna search it here as Windows MDT and click enter. And it will give us the link for the Windows MDT, also known as the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. And if you click on that, it'll get us to this Microsoft page. Again, I will leave these links in the description of this video. And I want the English version, so I'm going to go download here. And we have two options to select. One is the 64-bit version, the other one is the 32-bit options. I'm interested in the 64-bit version. So I'm going to select that MSI file and click next. And that will go ahead and start downloading the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, also known as the MDT. Once it has been downloaded, we can go to our download folder again. We can right click on the package and click install. And it will open up the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. This is a pretty fast setup. So we're going to click next here. Here's a user agreement. I'm going to select accept and click next. There are some options here you can select if you're interested in changing some of these features, but I'm going to leave it as default. And here's the location where it will get installed. So I'm going to click next. I'm going to select I don't want to join the program at this time for customer experience. I'm going to click next and click install. So it took few minutes, just few minutes to install that, and it's done. And I'm going to click finish to close the window. Now if I go to our start menu, notice that I have few items added now. The Windows kits, we have a bunch of items we can use. And also we have Microsoft Deployment Toolkit up here under M, and we have the deployment to workbench. We will come back to these items later in this tutorial. So what these items did actually install in the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit items as well as the Windows Kits items. Now, the next thing we need to do is to install WDS. In my previous tutorial, I went over Windows Deployment Services, also known as WDS. WDS is being depreciated by Microsoft and it is being replaced by the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit MDT. As of January 2023, in order to create an MDT, we still need to add WDS to this server because some of the components on WDS is needed to run MDT. To do that, open your server manager and in here go to the menu called Manage and select Add Roles and Features. Click Next. Select Role-based or Feature-based installation. Click Next. Make sure your server is selected here. Click Next. And on the server roles, we'll go down this list and select the Windows Deployment Services, this option. When you click that, it will give you the option to add additional features and we're going to add those features as well. Then we're going to click Next, 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 and under the WDS role services, in my previous tutorials, I explained how deployment server and transport server is important here. So we're going to make sure those are checked off as well. And we're going to click Next. Here we have the option to restart the destination server automatically if required. Typically this type of installation, you do not need to restart your server, but I'm going to check that thing off. Please keep in mind, if you have clients and services are currently running and being used, restart of your server may cause problems. So keep that in mind. This is my lab environment. So I'm going to just say yes to this warning message. And then I will click Install. Again, depending on your server configuration, it might take a few minutes, depending on how fast your device is. Once the installation process has been completed, we can close this window. And if we go back to our server manager, and in here, we can go to Tools. We have the option called the Windows Deployment Services. So let's launch the Windows Deployment Services console. Once the Deployment Services console has been opened, you can see that the Windows Deployment Services are not configured. On the left-hand pane, we have the servers, and if I expand that, we see this yellow triangle right next to our server, which is the SSServe SSServe to 2022 sanuja.local. If I click on it, it says the Windows Deployment Services is not configured. So the first thing we need to do is configure this Windows Deployment Services. To do that, we're gonna right click on the server right here and select Configure Server. In this window, you get a warning about certain features that you have to have within your server in order to get the full benefit of Windows Deployment Services. Those include having a DHCP server to assign IP addresses, DNS server properly configured, as well as some additional features that can come with the Active Directory domain services. On my previous tutorials, I have already explained how you can configure DHCP servers and DNS server as well as Active Directory domain services. So in this server, currently, I have all of those features are running. I have the DHCP running, DNS running, ADDS running. If you have any questions or concerns regarding how you can configure these features, please check my previous tutorials already posted on my YouTube channel. So let's go back to our Windows Deployment Services configuration window. And because I know all of these are already set up, I'm going to click Next. It will ask the installation options whether to be integrated with the Active Directory or standalone server. I will be using the integrated with Active Directory option because that way I can utilize my Active Directory configurations for my MDT. This is the most common option used by many organizations. So check with your organizations to see if they need a standalone server. Otherwise, go with the integrated with Active Directory. Then I'm going to click next. And it's going to ask you where should this remote folder should be located. Remote installation folder should be located. On my server, I have two hard drives. One is the local disk C, which is our main hard drive, and the server E. The server E is basically my secondary hard drive, and it is recommended that you install this kind of item on a secondary hard drive, not on your main hard drive. So I will be placing in this E drive this remote install folder. So I'm going to change this C to a E because it will go in that to that E drive. Then I'm going to click next. And I'm going to ask you questions about your proxy DHCP server. Again, I have already went over this on my previous tutorials. Basically, what you need to do is to make sure that do not listen to DHCP on IPv6 ports. And this one, the DHCP option for proxy DHCP is both checked off, unless you have a specific configuration need that you need these things to be going. So I'm going to leave it as it is in default and click next. And in here, they're going to ask how should the PXE server, initial settings should be set up. In other words, how should the network boot should respond to a device. I'll be selecting respond to all client computers, known and unknown. This way we have the ability to run MDT on any clients within this network. Then I will select next. And that will go ahead and install the Windows Deployment Services. Now the Windows Deployment Services has been installed. We can click finish on this window. And you can see on here, we have our server and it has this black dot, which is basically it is showing as stop. You can right click and go to all tasks and select start if you want to start this service right now. You don't have to do that, but you can do that at this point as well. So it will give you the message saying successfully started Windows Deployment Services. We can click OK. Notice, just like before, currently we don't have configured items in any of these sections right now, but we will come back to this later. Let's go to our deployment workbench console. So if you go to the start menu, remember we now have the new item called Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. If I open it, we have the deployment workbench. So this is the console we're going to open. So if you click on it, it will open up the deployment workbench console. On the left hand side, we have the deployment workbench and we have deployment shares section. If I click on it, currently there are no items in this particular folder. What we need to do now is to create a deployment share. To do that, I'm going to right click on the deployment share, select new deployment share, and it will open up the console for creating that deployment share. In here, again, just like before, I'm changing the share location from the C drive to our drive that is E, which is the secondary hard drive. So I will select this and change it to E. I'm going to click next, and it will give you the information on how this folder is created. As you can see, it automatically adds the $sign at the end of our share folder. That means this is a hidden share. And you also see the UNC path listed right below it. This looks good. So I'm going to click next. And it's going to ask you to specify a name for your deployment share. You can name whatever you like here. It's just to keep track of what your shares are. For now, I'm just going to leave it as it is as MDT Deployment Share and click Next. There are a few configuration options available to you here, such as whether it should ask for computer backup should be performed, ask for a Windows product key or administrative password, ask if the image should be captured, ask if the BitLocker should be enabled. So these are few options that you can either turn on or off. I'm going to leave it as default for now and click Next. It will give you a summary of the items here. And finally, we can click Next and it will go ahead and start installing the deployment share. So once it is done, you will get a message saying the process is completed successfully, and we can close this window. And on the left hand pane right now, we can see we can expand the deployment shares folder or section, and we see the MDT deployment share right here, and it is showing us in the E drive. And if we expand that, we have a bunch of items available here. Before we go over this item, I will go back to our E drive and I will show you that in the E drive we have the remote install, which was created by the Microsoft Windows Deployment Services. And we also have the deployment share folder, which is installed by the deployment workbench. So we have these two folders now created in our E drive. So let's go back to our workbench. I just want to show you those folders are now created. On our deployment workbench, we have the deployment shares. Underneath it, we have the MDT deployment share section, which is the in the E drive. And we have the applications, operating systems, out-of-box drivers, packages, task sequences, advanced configuration, and monitoring. For today, I will be only focusing on one of these sections called the operating system section. This way, we don't drag on this particular tutorial for too long, and it is easy for you guys to follow through. So before we install any operating systems here, the first thing we need to do is to go ahead and download an image file of the operating system you would like to install. So to do that, what I did, I went to Microsoft website and simply downloaded the Windows 11 Enterprise free version, and I have mounted that onto my Windows Server 2022. You can either create a bootable USB drive or a DVD drive and put it into your server, or you can download the image file and then mount it to your server. Once it is mounted, you know that the software is there under whatever the drive location. So in my case, it is the D drive. And if I right click on here and open this D drive, I have the files needed to create this MDT share. I have especially the boot file, for example. These are important files that we need to run the MDT for Windows 11 Enterprise. So I have the Windows 11 Enterprise located on the D drive right now, which is the bootable image. So now I know that. I'm going to go back to our deployment workbench console, right click on the operating systems and select import operating system. In here, you have a couple of options: full set of source files, custom image file, or Windows Deployment Services images. I will go over the custom image files and the Windows Deployment Services images in my future videos. On this particular tutorial, we will be selecting the full set of source files because we are using the Windows DVD, CD or equivalent. In other words, we are using the source files, right? The image file. I'm going to click next, and it's going to ask, where is this particular image is located. So remember, it is in my D drive. So I will click browse here and select my D drives because that's where all these files are located. So I'm going to select that D drive and click OK. I'm going to click next. And in here, they're going to ask you to specify the name of the directory that should be created for these operating system files. I will leave it as it is. This is what by default it pulled from that ISO file, which is the Windows 11 Enterprise Evaluation Edition 64-bit version. But you have the ability to add anything in here any way you like, depending on your organization's requirement. This is basically the name that's going to show up in this list right here on the deployment workbench console. I'm going to click next. And finally, it'll give you a confirmation of what about to do. And you can check that out and make sure it's all good to go and click next. And it'll go ahead and start installing the operating system needed for our MDT. So once that has been completed and confirmed, you can click finish to close that console. And you can see under the operating systems in here, in the deployment workbench, we have the Windows 11 Enterprise Evaluation Edition added. Notice it will be using the .wim file from that image. And that is maybe important to you if you are a student, if you want to know what kind of files it is using. If you expand this name, you will see, what kind of file it is being used. Next thing we need to do is to create a task sequence. If I click on task sequence right here, currently there is nothing here. Without a task sequence, we can't actually execute these operating system files within our MDT. So we will select the task sequence, right click and select new task sequence. And in here, it's going to ask for a task sequence ID. And you can say whatever you like. It's just to keep track of things. So I'm going to call it Win 11 ENT X64. But you can call it whatever you like. Maybe I will put a dash in here. And it's going to ask for the task sequence name. So I'm going to call it Windows 11 ENT X64. Again, you can say whatever you like. Same with the task sequence comments. It's just for you to keep track of. And then click next. And in here, we have a couple of templates you can use to launch this Windows installation. So currently, it is by default selected the standard client task sequence. There are a couple of other options in here that you can select, which I will go over in a different tutorial. For now, we will keep it in the default as standard client task sequence. Then I'm going to click next. And here under select OS, we see that Windows 11 Enterprise Evaluation copy showing up right here because we have already added that in my previous step. So we're going to select that and click next. Under specify product key, we have three options. Do not specify product key at this time. Specify multiple activation key, also known as MAK key, or specify a product key for this one particular instance of install. I will be selecting the option called do not specify a product key at this time because I will be using the evaluation edition, and I'm going to click next. However, if your organization have MAK product key or some other product key, you can select these options as well. So I will be going with do not specify a product key at this time and click next. It's going to ask you to specify how this task sequence should be run in terms of security. I will leave the Windows use as it is. And for organization, I'll call it Net IT Geeks, but you can call it whatever you like. You can call it sanuja.local, whatever you like. And for Internet Explorer homepage, for some reason they give that option here as well. This is going to be the default Internet Explorer homepage that people are going to see when they first launch the operating system after the installation. So I'm going to put https://sanuja.com. Again, you can put whatever you like in here. And at the top right here, it'll tell you what they are. So these settings are used for deployment of the task sequence, and unless overridden during the deployment process, it is the value they're going to use, right? So I'm just going to leave it, or you can do whatever you like. It's up to you and your organization to decide these options. I'm going to click next. And you can ask, specify the local administrator password for this task sequence. For me, I'm going to create an administrator password here that is easy for me to remember, but again, follow your organization's configurations for here. You can also have the option to select do not specify administrator password at this time, but I recommend that you always use an administrative password. So once that is done, we're going to click next. It'll give you a detailed view of what about to happen. So this is that information, and I'm going to click next, and it'll go ahead and start installing. So once the installation process has been successfully completed, we can click finish. And now under task sequences, we have the Windows 11 Enterprise x64 task sequence right here. If I select that and right click and go to properties, you can see there are a bunch of options that we can configure. For example, here we have the task sequence name we can edit, we can put comments on it, we can select certain platforms if you would like to choose that. We can also change how the task sequence are configured using the task sequence tab up here. And you can see there are a whole bunch of options and configurations items in here. You can run scripts, you can attach certain functionalities, and there are a lot you can do with it. If you click this add button, there are more items you can add onto this. For now, I will not go over any of these items right here. However, I will be creating a bunch of tutorials in the future that will be explaining some detailed configuration options available to us in the MDT configuration options. So make sure to thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel. That way you will get a notification whenever I upload a tutorial. So for now, I will keep all of these things in default as it is, and I'm going to close this window. And the next thing I'm going to do is to update this MDT Deployment Share section. So I'm going to select that and right click, select properties, and in here we have a couple of options for platforms. We have x64 and x86. I'm only interested in the x64 64-bit version, so I'm going to untick the x86 because I don't need it, but it is up to you. And we have the UNC path up here. Under rules, there are a bunch of rules that are currently there by default. And again, I will go over some additional configuration options you can do under the rules section in my future tutorials. And same with the bootstrap. So the bootstrap INI file has some settings already in there for default. But I will give you some additional settings that we can play with in our future tutorials. If you go to Windows PE tab, you can see there are a bunch of options such as generating a light touch bootable ISO file that can be used for boot images and bunch of other options in here as well. Again, I will go over all of these options in my future tutorials, but just know these options exist. And one thing I'm going to change here, however, is the monitoring one. I'm going to enable monitoring for this particular deployment, and I'm going to leave it the monitoring as monitoring host name as it is. If I go back to the general tab, I remember I also changed this to just include x64. I'm going to click apply and then click OK. Now, because I changed some properties here, like in these tabs, what I need to do is to update this MDT Deployment Share section. If you add any operating systems in here or any task sequences, you don't need to do this. This is only being done because I changed the properties in this particular category. So what I'm going to do, I will right click in here and select Update Deployment Share. Then I can have the option to choose Optimize Boot Image Updating Process or Completely Regenerate Boot Image. So I'm going to select the Completely Regenerate the Boot Images because that will make sure that everything will be recreated. I'm going to click Next and Next. Depending on your server, it might take a little while. to get installed, but it shouldn't take that long. So right now it is mounting the .wim file. Once the installation process has been completed, you can close this window by clicking Finish. And now if I go back to my E drive, so if I go to this PC E drive and go into the deployment share, under boot we have two new files, LiteTouchPE x64 and LiteTouchPE x64.wim. And then these two files are actually created by the process that ran through a few seconds ago. So basically, by right-clicking and updating this particular configuration, what happened is it created these two files. What we need to do now is to attach this LiteTouchPE x64 to our Windows Deployment Services. On the Windows Deployment Services console, I'm going to navigate to the boot images section, because we are not interested in install images right now. We are interested in boot images section. Why? Because the install images will be coming from our deployment workbench operating systems added in here. So because of that, I'm just going to navigate to the boot images section of our Windows Deployment Services, right click and select add boot image. And they're going to ask for the file location. What I will do, I will go into the browse right here and then go into the server data E section, and under deployment share, I will go into the boot section and then select the file called LiteTouchPE_x64.wim, LiteTouchPE x64.wim, because that's the file we need. And we can open it. And you can actually see the note just underneath it. It says the default boot image and install images, and they are looking for .wim file. And this is the one we need. This is the software program that will basically give us that pre-installation environment. And I'm going to click next. And it's going to ask for a name which you would like to go with. So I'm just going to leave it as LiteTouch Windows PE x64. But you can change it to anything you like. And then we're going to click next, next, and then it'll go ahead and start adding that image to our WDS. So once that image has been added, we can click finish. And now we have the LiteTouch Windows PE boot image added to our WDS. Remember, this file was actually created by the deployment workbench configurations and settings that we went through previously. So basically, the Windows Deployment Services is working together with the deployment workbench, which is part of our Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, also known as MDT, to deploy the MDT sequences. So now we have the LiteTouch Windows PE created by the MDT configuration console in the deployment workbench. In here, we can go ahead and boot up a machine and see if we can get into our MDT installation environment. In other words, we have now completed the installation process of MDT. Only thing we need to do now is to test whether it's work. So let's go and open one of my virtual machine. And this virtual machine is set up in a way so it will look for PXE, also known as the network boot environment. If you don't know how to get into that, please check your BIOS or UEFI settings. I have already posted a video on my YouTube channel explaining how to do that on VMware. And I'm going to simply power this machine on. And it is looking for network boot. And there you go. It found the network boot, and I'm going to press enter. It has the IP address and everything good to go, and it is running from that LiteTouchPE x64. You can see that right here. That's the file that we got on our Windows Deployment Services. And as you can see, it launched the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, also known as MDT. Once the MDT toolkit has been loaded, you will get two options: run the MDT or exit to command prompt. Again, you can custom configure all of these options, and I will show you those advanced settings in my future tutorials. For now, just to show you how MDT works, I'm going to select run the deployment wizard to install a new operating system. So that will open up our credential request. So I'm going to do administrator. And I'm gonna ask for the password, the domain, and I'm gonna click OK. And that got me into the MDT deployment environment. And right now we have the only option available to us, which is the Windows 11. And I'm going to select that Windows 11 Enterprise and click Next. Gonna ask what kind of name I would like to have. I'm just going to leave it as default as it is. So because I haven't done the configuration for our domain, which I will go over later in our MDT, I have the choice of either joining a domain right here, which I need to give all the credentials and information, or I can just install it as a workgroup option. So I can actually lock these options if I don't want anybody to get access to changing these configurations in the MDT settings tools, which I will explain on a different tutorial. For now, I'm just going to leave it in the join workgroup, and I'm going to click Next. And in here we have options for moving data. So do you want to move data or previous settings of the Windows? And you can also move user data, and if it is available. So in this particular brand new machine, it doesn't have it, so we're just going to select do not move user data settings, and I'm going to click Next. And specify whether to restore user data. Again, you have the options in here available. You can go through that. This is the information on your time settings. We can click Next. And here's another one regarding whether to capture some images during the installation process, after the installation process. And we can click Next. And then finally, it'll give you a detailed information about what we are about to do, and we can click Begin, and it'll go ahead and install the Windows Windows 11 Enterprise 64-bit version. This is everything for today. This is how you can configure Windows Server 2022 to run MDT. There are lots of other configuration options within the MDT workbench that I have skipped over just to keep this tutorial short. I will post additional tutorials on intermediate and advanced MDT configurations and settings in the future. So please make sure to thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, thank you so much and have a nice day.